The treasure of Tutankhamun and the story of its discovery are the stuff of legend. But the golden boy behind the legend remains a mystery. Now the descendant of a man who helped discover Tut's tomb travels to Egypt in search of the boy king behind the mask.
The fantastic discovery is only the beginning of the story.
He'll explore new tombs and museum vaults, filled with items that have never been analyzed. Tut's weapons, his medicine, the clothes he wore. He'll study new forensic evidence on how King Tut died. And he'll reveal secrets that the legendary pharaoh took to his grave. Today, King Tut's treasures are famous worldwide, but we know very little about Tutankhamun himself. A boy propelled to the throne by age 9 and dead by the age of 19. He was overshadowed by the great pharaohs who preceded him and those who followed in his wake. And Tut's life story was largely unknown, since ancient records were destroyed in antiquity. For more than 3,000 years, Tutankhamun lay almost forgotten here in the traditional burial ground of the pharaohs, Egypt's Valley of the Kings. Until November 1922, when archaeologist Howard Carter and his wealthy patron, the Earl of Carnarvon, made one of the greatest finds of the 20th century. They stumbled upon a treasure hoard beyond their wildest dreams. Almost 5,400 artifacts, many made of solid gold. The Egyptians of Tut's era prized the precious metal, believing that it guaranteed resurrection. They called it the flesh of the gods. The find created a worldwide sensation. Up until then, every royal tomb discovered had long ago been stripped by grave robbers. But here, nearly everything was still in place. Lord Carnarvon unearthed priceless treasures. Everything Tutankhamun believed he would need in the next life was right here in his tomb. Carnarvon's extraordinary find presented a new challenge for Egyptologists: piece together the life story of this mysterious boy king. Highclere Castle in southern England is home to the present-day 8th Earl of Carnarvon. Carnarvon's great-grandfather spent more than 10 years and much of the family fortune searching for the tomb of King Tut. His untimely death at the moment of his triumph sparked rumors of a pharaoh's curse.
There are many ideas that if you disturb an intact tomb of a pharaoh, then something terrible will befall you. This, in fact, is my great-grandfather's cutthroat razor, which, in fact, led to his death. He got bitten by a mosquito, and then was shaving in the Winter Palace Hotel, and he didn't pay attention to the rather nasty mosquito bite, nicked his face there, and let the bacteria in.
Lord Carnarvon believes his great-grandfather's death was the result of an untreated infection, not a curse. A tragedy after the discovery of a sacred treasure, but the popular press found the idea of a curse irresistible. Some said that when the Earl died in Cairo, the city was plunged into darkness. Blackouts were actually common at the time. But believers in the curse saw something more sinister in the circumstances.
Back here at Highclere, exactly the same time, his beloved little dog, Susie, suddenly died as well. After a long howl, she expired. So there were some spooky things that happened at the time of the death of my great-grandfather.
While one man's coincidence is another man's curse, the fact is there is no curse carved into the stones of Tut's tomb. And Carnarvon is eager to investigate the ancient mysteries it holds.
There's so much more to learn. The whole story grows and grows on one, really. The more one reads the books, looks at the pictures, sees the objects.
More than 80 years later, Lord Carnarvon follows in his ancestors' footsteps on a quest to examine new evidence on Tutankhamun that's now emerging from Egypt. The Earl will focus on key archaeological sites across Egypt and the vaults of the Cairo Museum. He'll start by visiting the site of his great-grandfather's historic discovery.
It's one thing seeing things in an exhibition, then actually going out to the tomb in the Valley of the Kings to feel the incredible heat and the dust and the atmosphere of the burial place of Tutankhamun. It's a special moment for a member of the family to be able to see it after so many years, really. And here, of course, is the threshold of the door to the antechamber, where Carter and Carnarvon, my great-grandfather, they stood here. They'd knocked through with a chisel a hole into the door. And Carter looked through. First he sees nothing, and then everywhere, the glint of gold.
The scale of the find is overwhelming, and it's comprised of much more than gold. The tomb contains objects that were overlooked at first, but are now being analyzed. They provide an extraordinary picture of the boy king that contradicts much of what we thought we knew about King Tut. Many experts wrote off Tutankhamun as a minor character in Egypt's long history. He appeared to be physically fragile and a weak ruler. Evidence suggested he might even have been murdered by a stronger contender for the throne. Now these theories are being challenged. Lord Carnarvon will revisit all the conflicting scientific data. And Tut's mummy has already been painstakingly scrutinized 4 times. In 1925, through an autopsy. Then in 1968 and 78, using X-rays. And in 2005, with a state-of-the-art CT scanner. Each time, experts have arrived at radically different theories on how Tut lived and died.
Good to see you. I'm very happy.
Without Lord Carnarvon's great-grandfather, King Tut might never have been found. The Egyptian Museum in Cairo will grant the Earl unique access to view artifacts from Tut's tomb, with Dr. Zahi Hawass as his guide. Carnarvon will look beyond the famous treasures. He'll venture into the museum vaults to see artifacts largely untouched since his great-grandfather's era.
There is at least 500 pieces are not shown to the public. It's hidden in this store.
Items that were once thought to be insignificant are now yielding exciting evidence of who King Tut was.
They are incredible.
The tomb contained hundreds of textiles, robes, shoes, even clothes from Tut's childhood, many hastily repacked by protectors of the tomb after ancient break-ins. Now, leading experts in ancient textiles are analyzing them at a research center in the Netherlands. The original garments are almost 3,500 years old, in poor condition and extremely fragile. So researchers created exact replicas to test how they might have been worn. By measuring each garment, they can accurately assess Tut's body shape for the first time. They can learn whether he was slight or muscular, fat or thin. Although a mummy provides good evidence of underlying bone structure, gauging how much muscle and fat there was in life is mainly guesswork. Experts have always been puzzled by images like these, where Tut's family look almost pear-shaped. For the research team, the most revealing items of all turn out to be Tutankhamun's loincloths. More than 100 of them were discovered inside the tomb, and now they've been measured.
His body size was not as we had anticipated. The garments had shown he had a narrow upper part of the body, similar to our model here, but in fact narrower here, very narrow around the waist, but his hips were huge in comparison to the rest of his body.
Tut's skeleton reveals that he was about 5'6". His clothes show that his chest measured only 31 inches around, his waist 29 inches, but his hips were 43 inches.
In fact, his hips were much closer to my hips than to my model's hips. It's something on a male body that is just not normal. Maybe genetic, or it's a disease that's prevalent in that region. We just don't know.
This study of Tut's clothing shows that he looked more like the carvings and statues than some had thought. One theory was that images like this may have had special religious significance. Maybe the pharaoh saw himself as a mythical being inside a body that was half male, half female. But the truth appears to be much simpler.
What we're saying is, look at it again. It may well represent reality, and that was a total and utter new discovery, quite a shock for people. And there are many people who still do not accept this information. Tutankhamun should be the golden boy, not somebody with a pear shape.
A new picture of Tutankhamun is already starting to emerge. But to find out more about the boy king's mysterious family background, Lord Carnarvon needs to travel further. He's heading about 200 miles south of Cairo to the ruined riverside city of Amarna, King Tut's birthplace. Here, evidence of the pharaoh's boyhood is being pieced together. Archaeologists led by Professor Barry Kemp have mapped out a city unique in the ancient world.
It's a mixture of elements that were grand and colorful, impressive, and a series of joined-up villages.
Tutankhamun was born into a turbulent era. The sprawling city of Amarna was built at a frantic pace, housing tens of thousands within 2 years. It was Egypt's new capital and the seat of a new religion, both created by the pharaoh Akhenaten, Tut's probable father. But the identity of King Tut's mother is a mystery still waiting to be solved. For decades, experts have looked for firm evidence to establish the identity of King Tut's mother. Many Egyptologists believe that the pharaoh Akhenaten was Tut's father, but the identity of his mother has long been a mystery. Akhenaten's principal wife was the legendary Nefertiti. Both beautiful and powerful, Nefertiti bore Akhenaten several daughters, but no sons. So Tut's mother may have been one of the pharaoh's lesser wives, a concubine. We know very little about who she was, but there are clues among the barely legible inscriptions found in the tombs of Amarna.
Now, what do you make of that?
The most likely candidate is a woman known as Akhenaten's greatly beloved wife. Her name is Kia. This alabaster carving is one of the few surviving images of Kia.
We're looking at the North Palace here as well.
And among the ruins of the North Palace at Amarna, there are more clues about her status.
It's very likely that the queen who resided here was in fact Kia herself.
Kia would have lived in style, surrounded by servants. One inscription even refers to her as the secondary queen. The professor's team has pinpointed what they believe was the royal suite, and this was the royal bath, complete with a sump or water receptacle in the center of the floor.
There's no drainage system within the palace at all. Kia would have stood there. It must have been simply done by pouring the water over her. And when it's all over, the water drains into a sandstone sump, and then it has to be emptied out by hand and the water carried out. And then next to it's this similarly sized room, which we can confidently label as the bedroom, because at the back the walls step in to create an alcove.
Clues suggest that this bedchamber could be where life began for Tutankhamun.
And Akhenaten himself could have even visited her here, so maybe even Tutankhamun was conceived here. Maybe outside possibility, but it could be the case.
It is possible.
We even perhaps assume she was actually pregnant with Tutankhamun here, in fact.
Yes. If it wasn't this one precisely, it must have been one very much like it.
At about the same time Tut was born, Kia suddenly disappears from the record. But why would the mother of the next pharaoh simply vanish? Professor Kemp now has evidence that may provide an explanation. His analysis of a series of carvings inside Amarna's royal tomb reveals a story of sudden death.
This is an extraordinary portrayal of a personal moment in the life of the royal family. Nefertiti's expressing grief. One of her arms, her right arm, is thrown up like this, and her husband, Akhenaten, standing beside her doing the same thing, expressing anguish.
In one scene, a birth has just taken place.
They are pointing to the identity of the baby as being Tutankhamun himself. Down here, there was a woman lying on a bed, the object of the grief that's being expressed.
Another part of the carving suggests that a woman has died in childbirth. If Tut's mother died, as the carvings suggest, then who took her place? For years, the boyhood of King Tut was shrouded in mystery. Now, Carnarvon's journey takes him to an archaeological site that yields new evidence of King Tut's early life. When this tomb was first uncovered more than 10 years ago, it appeared to belong to a female servant of the royal family. But after a series of key finds, its true significance is beginning to emerge.
This could be the most important discovery that also happened for Tutankhamun.
This cobra headdress signifies royalty. And these hieroglyphs contain the signature of Tutankhamun himself.
Look what's happening here. A lady sitting, and her name is written hieroglyphic, Maya. She was the wet nurse of Tutankhamun. A wet nurse can be a guardian, can be a mother, can be...
Nanny, and also.
Nanny, can be someone. Look at her hand. The position of her hand towards him, it shows love and affection. It's unique. I think from that scene, I can really see that Tutankhamun considered Maya as his real mother, the one that trained him to be a king.
But would he become a king in anything more than name? As a young boy, did he exercise real power? The answer lies nearly 200 miles south of Amarna in the city of Thebes, present-day Luxor. When Akhenaten died, Tutankhamun was proclaimed pharaoh, the most powerful figure in the ancient world at just 9 years old. The new capital, Amarna, was abandoned. King Tut would rule from Thebes, the traditional seat of power. Dr. Melinda Hartwig and Lord Carnarvon are re-evaluating this period in Tut's life.
So he comes to the throne here about 9 or 10 years old in a time of great political turmoil, potential change everywhere. And how much could he actually influence events at that age?
Probably not a lot. It's clear that there were some people behind the throne that were sort of pulling the strings, taking care of the royal palace, the administration, and also the military aspect of Egypt. So these people seem to have held a great deal of control.
At a very young age, Tut marries Ankhsenamun. She was several years older than him and was probably his half-sister.
How much choice would he have had in that process? Would it have been any sort of affection, or would it have been really all about protocol and duty as much as anything else?
It probably was protocol and duty. She was much older than he was, so I'm sure he didn't have much of a say in it. Most likely it was, again, these people behind the scenes pulling the strings that would have engineered this particular marriage.
The young couple are pictured on many of the priceless treasures. Tutankhamun's golden throne, this wooden chest inlaid with ivory, images showing the pharaoh's power and majesty. But this image puzzles the experts. Tut seems to be leaning on a stick, using it almost like a crutch. Inside his tomb were 130 sticks similar to the one depicted. Dr. Robert Connolly was part of the team that conducted the first X-rays of Tutankhamun's mummy in 1968. What he saw then seemed to support the theory that King Tut was disabled.
The flat plate X-rays show that the vertebral column, the backbone, isn't quite straight. And it has been suggested that this is a condition, a curvature of the spine referred to as scoliosis.
This means, at the very least, that Tut would have had difficulty walking, just like in the picture. But almost 40 years later, there's a second opinion. In 2005, under the direction of Dr. Zahi Hawass, Tut's mummy was carefully removed from its tomb and placed inside this machine to undergo computed tomography, a CT scan.
CT scanning produces the most spectacular detail. With the CT scan, you can produce whatever images you want in any angle, in any direction, and in any magnification.
In 3D, a different reason for the twisted spine appears. It may have been caused by the embalmers when they laid out Tut's body to mummify him.
If this had been scoliosis, there would have been rotation of some of the vertebrae. They're not. They're perfectly formed, perfect young adult vertebra. So scoliosis is out.
The new evidence has led experts to reconsider these artifacts, the walking sticks found in Tutankhamun's tomb. Some are richly decorated, suggesting that their use may have been ceremonial.
Staves or staffs were very traditional for the pharaoh, and in fact it proclaimed his power as a ruler. And from Tut's tomb there were a number of staves that were found, so much so that Carter said that he thought that he was sort of an amateur collector. There's no evidence whatsoever that the king was a weakling or had any kind of major physical problems.
Once one studies the objects more closely, you begin to understand Tutankhamun more as a person with his family around him, and that's what's fascinating about it.
The evidence seems to suggest that Tut was a healthy young man, and yet he died young. It's a mystery that the Earl of Carnarvon will try to unravel to answer the toughest question of all. Who or what killed King Tut? Cairo's Egyptian Museum is the world's greatest storehouse of Egyptian antiquities, with more than 3,500 objects from the tomb of Tutankhamun alone. Some of the treasures unearthed by Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon's great-grandfather have toured the world. Others have remained in storage for decades. Now they're the subject of new research. Alongside golden treasures, simple jars and baskets heaped in the tomb seemed to contain only mundane foodstuffs. But a professor from the University of Copenhagen believes they could actually provide evidence of how Tut died.
The collection of herbs and seeds in the tomb of Tutankhamun were not there just to spice up his food. It would have medicinal uses.
The ancient Egyptians believed that the afterlife was a continuation of this life. After death, Tutankhamun might still need medicine, just as he did when he was alive. So the tomb can provide remarkable insight into what would have been Tutankhamun's personal medicine cabinet.
It tells us something about what kind of health hazards they were aware of in those days, such as fevers and epidemics.
The professor's analysis of the 3,300-year-old botanical samples reveals that many of the same herbal remedies are still widely used in Egypt today. One of Tut's trusted medicines seems to have been this, the dried husks of nabk fruit.
No fewer than 36 baskets of this fruit were included in his burial equipment.
So they help lower the blood pressure. Yeah.
Nabk was used as a kind of rescue remedy, steeped in water or milk and taken internally for all sorts of diseases.
Analysis shows that Tut went into the next world armed with large quantities of coriander. For him, this wasn't a culinary ingredient, but a vital medicine.
Coriander was used to cure headaches and things like that. But the question that it was used to treat fever, I think, is interesting, because at the time when Tutankhamun lived, there was an epidemic going round in the Eastern Mediterranean that killed off quite a lot of people.
Was Tutankhamun a victim of disease, explaining why medicine is so prevalent in his tomb? Even with the tools currently available, a firm diagnosis is nearly impossible after almost 3,500 years.
For every one cause of death which you can see on an X-ray or on a CT scan, there must be another 10,000 which won't show up. Infectious disease, you might have had malaria, that wouldn't show up. Food poisoning, that wouldn't show up on the X-ray either.
For the Earl of Carnarvon, the question of whether Tut died of disease has to remain open. Many other theories have been advanced since his great-grandfather discovered the tomb in 1922. And with each new advance in forensic science, new scenarios have been proposed. The first X-rays in 1968 appear to show signs of injury, a swelling at the base of the skull consistent with a sharp blow to the back of the head. Was Tutankhamun assassinated? His father certainly had powerful enemies who might have seized their chance to take control before the young pharaoh consolidated his own hold on power. The circumstantial evidence seemed to point to murder. But new technology has led to a closer examination of the physical evidence. After the CT scan in 2005, some members of the X-ray team were in for a surprise. The scan revealed that the apparent swelling of the skull was no more than a distorted image caused by a small but critical error.
The radiographer in the 1960s just didn't quite align the skull square to the X-ray plate. And if you look carefully, you can see that it's actually just two sides of the skull showing up on the one X-ray. CT scans confirmed in detail that the skull of Tutankhamun is perfectly normal and there is no evidence for injury.
The CT scan solved one mystery, but crucial questions concerning Tut's body still had to be resolved. As the mummy was prepared for X-ray, researchers became suspicious. Body parts, including Tut's rib cage and breastbone, were missing. The latest examination of the body only deepened the mystery.
The CT scans have shown something which we couldn't see on the flat plate X-rays, and that is that the ribs have not been broken, they're actually been intentionally cut through. We're not exactly sure why, but somebody somewhere along the line has removed the front of his chest.
A team of Egyptologists wants to discover who could have done it and why. It's a forensic mystery more than 80 years in the making. The first detailed examination of King Tut's mummified remains was in 1925, an autopsy conducted by a team appointed by Howard Carter. But it was no easy task. The ancient embalmers coated the bandages with a sticky black resin, which set to a rock-hard consistency. It was designed to protect the mummy over the centuries, but also to hide the riches within. Tut's embalmers placed 143 pieces of gold and jewelry among his linen wrappings. Nearly 3,500 years later, these precious objects were removed by the autopsy team. With the exception of a collar of beads, they were stuck in the embalmer's resin and impossible to remove without hacking into the body itself. Before the coffin lid was replaced, the mummy was photographed by Carter's teammate, Harry Burton.
These photographs that Burton took are fabulous because there's this full body photograph that shows you what Carter left in the tomb. And you can see this huge broad collar with a lot of these beads standing up, and then another sort of necklace going across the chest, and you can see very, very clearly all the ribs are intact. You can see it's all beautifully laid out on this sand tray the way Carter buried it.
The next time Tut's body was examined was when the team from Liverpool University arrived to conduct their X-rays. But now, Tut's ribs and other body parts were missing.
The collarbone and, in fact, the whole broad collar is gone. So a lot of things that were there when Carter put Tutankhamun into the tomb were not there in 1968. I think it's astonishing that no one paid more attention to the documentation so beautifully provided by Carter and then compared it to what happened when they opened up the tomb in 1968.
Had Tutankhamun become the victim of 20th century grave robbers? For decades, Tut's tomb has been one of the most popular tourist sites in Egypt, visited by hundreds of people every day and guarded around the clock. But there was one period when the Valley of the Kings was deserted and the tomb was vulnerable. Egypt was a battleground throughout much of World War II, a time of tension and chaos, with no tourists and few guards in the Valley of the Kings. For grave robbers, these were ideal conditions.
Security would have been lax, there would have been a lot of soldiers from all over the world. So it is quite feasible that either soldiers or even Egyptians decided that they would take this opportunity when the valley was not well guarded to open up the tomb and remove parts of the body of Tutankhamun and sell them off.
The beaded collar was stuck to Tutankhamun's ribcage. To get it, one would also have had to slice off his ribs. The clean cut is revealed by the CT scan. The researchers have shed light on a decades-old mystery. But the question of how King Tut died is still unresolved. The CT scan also revealed a break in Tutankhamun's left leg, just above the knee. Was this just another example of damage caused long after death? Or was it an injury sustained while the pharaoh was still alive? Since early boyhood, the young pharaoh would have been surrounded by servants and closely protected by bodyguards. So how could he have sustained such a severe injury? For answers, the Earl of Carnarvon turns to the museum vaults. And as he examines objects the pharaoh took to the grave, a pattern starts to emerge. The tomb contained more than 500 arrows, and probably not all of them were ceremonial. Some may have actually been used. Tutankhamun is often pictured hunting from his chariot. And there's more evidence that these artifacts were used by the pharaoh himself. On hunting expeditions, he would have needed this, a folding camp bed.
I think this one actually belonged to Tutankhamun. The size too, I mean, look to how it's the lungs and how...
It's not a small boy, but
no.
He's not a bigger man.
Yes,
so it's just
it is,
right
it
for
is
his size.
Exactly Tutankhamun. It's exactly him. And if you look here, you will find that there is a traces that it was used.
And other artifacts provide even more evidence that Tut was a hunter.
Let me show you. Look here. Can you see this deep line?
Yes.
This is from the movement of the wheel on the axle.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So this was used a fair bit, this chariot.
Yeah. This chariot is actually used in life, and you can see it here too.
That's the wear on the shaft. Would Tutankhamun have actually been fighting in a chariot like this? Would he have taken on another army soldiers in this type of chariot?
I don't think this is a war chariot, no. This is a hunting chariot.
At first, there's no clear evidence that the pharaoh actually drove the chariot himself. But then proof comes from an unlikely source, clothing discovered in King Tut's tomb. For textile analysts, a simple strip of plain linen opens a window on the pharaoh's life.
This basically is a corset and was needed when Tutankhamun was on his chariot, because they didn't have springs, the chariots, in that period, and it protects, supports, and keeps in place the kidneys and inner organs. And it's a sort of sportswear, but essential for keeping him healthy and not causing any internal damage. And then here, this would have been kept in place with gold armbands, and this area was needed in order to protect his back from the sun. It's a sun shield.
The young pharaoh had another key item in his sports kit.
The glove goes on like that. What we're putting on now is the gauntlets, which he would have worn when he was riding on his chariot. Again, it's sportswear. And it was to protect his hand and also to make holding the leather reins much easier. And the reins of the horse go through there, between the fingers, The thumb comes in there, and then keep pulling hard. You can't get it out.
Today, we'd call it extreme sports. Exciting, highly dangerous, but for Tutankhamun, it could have been fatal. New evidence from the tomb of King Tut suggests that he was an avid sportsman and drove a chariot on desert hunting trips. A CT scan shows that his left leg was fractured. Could a chariot accident be the cause?
Those chariots could have reached considerable speeds, 25 miles an hour more over rough ground. If a chariot turns over at that speed, it could easily break your leg very seriously.
The CT scan provides compelling evidence that the fracture was caused by an accident while Tut was still alive.
Some embalming material has seeped in between the two ends of the fractured bone, indicating that the bone must have been fractured before the embalmers started their work. So it does look as though the left leg was broken at the knee before he died.
This probably wouldn't be a life-threatening injury today, but the fracture could have proved fatal for the young pharaoh due to infection. And another remarkable piece of detective work adds support to this theory. A fragile garland of leaves and flower petals was placed in Tutankhamun's coffin. These remains have been analyzed by Nigel Hepper at London's Royal Botanic Gardens. Inscriptions indicate that Tutankhamun's burial took place sometime around 1325 BC. The species of flowers in the garland narrows it down even further.
The cornflower and the mayweed were in flower about the middle of March to the end of April. Of course, now they all look brown, but at that time they would be fresh and green and white and pink. They must have been fresh because they were supple enough to fold over and to sew.
So Tutankhamun's funeral must have taken place in early spring, even though his death occurred much earlier. The complex process of mummification typically lasted at least 70 days.
And so that takes us way back to about what is now known as our Christmas, when Tutankhamun died.
It's one more piece of the jigsaw puzzle, and it seems to fit. For much of the year, Tut wouldn't have ventured into the searing 100-degree heat of the Egyptian desert. But in late December, daytime temperatures dropped to the low 70s, perfect for a hunting expedition. Dr. Zahi Hawass, the archaeologist who led the CT scanning team, believes there's now convincing evidence of how Tutankhamun died.
He was not murdered, as many people thought. He had an accident when he was hunting in the desert. Falling from a chariot, made this fracture in his left leg, and this is really, in my opinion, how he died.
Both the scientific evidence and the tomb artifacts have also given the Earl of Carnarvon a new understanding, not just of Tut's death, but also of his life. He's discovered a real person, one very different from the image he once held.
The main perception that's changed, actually, is that he's actually rather a more active young man than I originally envisaged. I perhaps thought he was an over-cosseted child, but I think he was out there in the field taking part in things towards the end of his short life.
The Earl of Carnarvon's great-grandfather died before ever having seen the golden mask of Tutankhamun. The Earl has seen and now learned far more than his ancestor could ever have imagined. As for King Tut, his dream was to live forever. And now, thousands of years after his death, the famous boy king lives on.